There are some people who, even in their silence, hide a scream. Their smile is a defense they have built up over the years. The calmness in their eyes covers a long, suppressed storm inside. Accustomed to carrying the weight of life alone, these people are often described as strong. But this strength is not what you think it is. Sometimes it is just the outward reflection of a soul that has learned not to feel too much, so as not to burden anyone. And the strange thing is, these people are often not understood, because they don't show their pain, they don't ask for help, they just go on. But this going on is not a state of well-being, but a way of survival. People who learn to hide their feelings as children, who cannot trust anyone even in adulthood, forget even themselves in time. As Carl Jung said, unseen pain becomes behavior. So if a person seems distant to you, it doesn't mean that they are cold. Maybe they are just being protected. Maybe he's still triggered by the hurt he experienced in the past when he trusted someone. This video describes exactly these people. Souls who on the outside appear strong, stable, and in control, but on the inside they are battling with huge waves. They are the people who exhaust themselves trying to keep everything in order, who show too much empathy for others and forget themselves, who carry unseen burdens and can never fully relax. Maybe you are like this too. Maybe you have started to see someone you love in this way, but you can't figure out why. What we are going to explain here is not just to list behavioral patterns or to analyze someone. The aim is to approach with more understanding, more compassion, less judgment. Because some people silently say, "Help me." But not with words, but with distance, control, even silence. And if we can learn to hear that silence, maybe we can touch not only their wounds, but also some of the wounds that we suppress within ourselves. In this video, we will share 13 key behavioral traits of people who have experienced a lot of pain. These behaviors are often misunderstood and even seen as weird by many. But in fact, each one is based on a wound from the past, a survival mechanism. And understanding these traits is a powerful step towards seeing ourselves and those around us in a more real, deeper, and more human way. So please watch this video not just to learn, but to feel. Because sometimes the greatest understanding comes not from words, but from intuition. And if this sounds familiar to you, remember, you are not alone. Maybe this is the right time to recognize the burdens you have been carrying silently for years. If you are ready, let's begin. 1. Armor of extreme independence. Some people have to stand on their own early in life. The people they trusted may have let them down. No one may have been there when they needed them. So over time, they develop this belief: I should trust no one but myself. From the outside, these people may appear strong, determined, in control, and even admirable. But this independence is often not a choice, but the mark of necessity. Someone who hides their pain so as not to be a burden to anyone, who is ashamed to ask for help, and who tries to handle everything internally, is really just trying to survive. As Carl Jung said, repressed pain turns into behavior. In this case, independence becomes the invisible shield of inner loneliness. They cannot say what they feel because they do not believe that anyone will understand. So they become silent, keep their distance, and try to prove that they live without needing anyone. But nobody has to be strong all the time. Being strong sometimes means knowing how to ask for help. And the real need under this armor is often much more human: to be understood, to be loved without being a burden. 2. Over-empathy. Some people can sense the tension in a room without anyone saying a word. They can tell by facial expressions, a look, the slightest change in tone of voice that something is wrong. These people often feel a lot for others, but find it difficult to identify their own feelings. This is because they have learned at a very young age, if you first recognize what others feel, you can avoid problems. At first glance, this hypersensitivity seems like a virtue, but at its root there is often a kind of defense. A child who grows up in an unstable home, constantly scanning the environment to avoid emotional outbursts, grows up to be an overly empathetic adult. Carl Jung said that when people cannot accept their own shadow side, they project it onto others. And sometimes this kind of empathy is actually a way of taking refuge in other people's emotions to avoid one's own. These people, who are always listening, supportive, and feel for everyone, forget themselves at some point. They are there for others but not for themselves. And the most corrosive part is that while everyone sees them as good, they burn out from the inside. 3. Fear of real relationships. While intimacy means warmth and connection for most people, for some it feels like a threat, especially for those who have been hurt, abandoned, or emotionally neglected by loved ones in the past. When these people get really close to someone, an invisible alarm goes off inside them. As they feel love, the fear grows, because the mind whispers that they may relive old hurts. These people often appear distant, or they say, "I'm better on my own." But this is not because they really choose to be alone, but because they are afraid of being disappointed again. Carl Jung says that unconscious complexes feed on past hurts and can sabotage present relationships. Therefore, even the smallest intimacy can trigger past traumas. True love requires one to be visible. But for these people, being visible means risk, vulnerability, and loss of control. So they hold back, even if they love, because they still haven't learned to trust. 4. The strong personality who stands alone. From the outside, they stand out with their firm stance, decisive voice, and clear gaze. People admire them and say, "How strong." But no one realizes what a tired soul lies beneath this strength. Because these people did not choose to be strong, they were forced to be strong. Life left them alone at an early age, forcing them to stand on their own feet. And over time, appearing strong became the only way to survive. They smile, but inside, they feel exhausted. Asking for help feels like weakness to them, so they do everything on their own. As Carl Jung said, it's a social mask. But when the mask is worn for a long time, the person forgets who they are. They suppress their real needs, hide their emotions, and continue to appear to others as nice. But the real strength is not to stand up straight all the time, but to be able to admit that sometimes you are tired. These people rarely do that, because in their world, they have been taught to hide their emotions rather than face them. 5. Sensory sensitivity. Loud noises, crowded environments, bright lights. For some people, they are not only uncomfortable, but almost unbearable. This is because their bodies live in constant vigilance. From the outside, these people can be described as sensitive or hypersensitive. However, this sensitivity is a bodily reflection of the emotional storms they have experienced in the past. As Jung said, the pain that cannot reach the level of consciousness is revealed through the language of the body. These people may have grown up in homes where danger was silently approaching. They learn to protect themselves by noticing the change in someone's tone of voice, the tension in their face. Now, even when there is no real threat, their bodies remain alert. Their heart races, their breathing becomes labored, their desire to flee increases. Sensory sensitivity is often seen as an exaggeration, but it is actually a defense reflex that the body has learned in the past. They are safe now, but their body still lives in the past. And when this sensitivity is well understood, it can work like an internal alarm system, not a burden. But for those who don't understand it, it remains just a quirk. 6. Obsession with control. Some people plan their lives inch by inch. They want everything to be in place. Even a small change makes them uneasy. From the outside, this may look like discipline, rigor, or perfectionism, but underneath lies a very different truth. The battle of a soul that once lost control completely to avoid falling back into chaos. For these people, controlling is not just a way of maintaining order, it is a way of staying safe. Because at some point in their lives, they were caught off guard. And that unpreparedness cost them dearly. In Carl Jung's words, the ego tries to keep control in order to cope with unconscious fears that it does not want to face. Surprises for these people mean potential threat, not pleasure. It is not easy to rest, even to relax. Their mind is always preparing for the next step. And all this effort is an invisible fortress against the old fear that lies deep inside. It looks solid on the outside, but on the inside, it exhausts, depletes, and isolates. 7. Making silence a refuge. There are people who avoid crowds, avoid long conversations, and prefer to be alone. Most people interpret this as arrogance, distance, or indifference. But some silences are not born out of loneliness, but out of the need to heal. For these people, silence is a refuge from the exhaustion of the outside world. That quiet space where there are no words, no expectations, no judgments. Sometimes it is the only way to breathe. Carl Jung sees retreat as a necessary space for the soul to regroup. It is a retreat into silence, a resting of the emotions, a repairing of the soul. But when this silence goes on for too long, it can become a wall rather than a pause. What was once healing becomes a line of demarcation. And without realizing it, one excludes everyone else. That's why not everyone who goes into silence is good. Some become silent to survive. Some have stopped talking just because they are not understood, and some are silent because they want to say so much, but have forgotten how to say it anymore. 8. The overprotected heart. Building walls around the heart is often born out of necessity, not decision. If the price of trust has been too high in the past, one becomes cautious even of love. Even in the face of sincerity, they become silent and hold back. This avoidance is not recklessness, it is a reflex of self-preservation. Because there has been a deep fracture in a place where the heart once opened completely, that scar is still there. A small intimacy can remind of a past betrayal. A warm word can trigger an old separation. As Carl Jung said, repressed traumas of the past cast a shadow over present relationships. For someone living with this shadow, love is not only a feeling, but also a threat. Even when all is well, an inner voice whispers, "Be prepared." Trust takes a long time to build, but it can be destroyed in an instant. So patience may be needed with someone who is trying to protect their heart, because not opening the door right away doesn't mean that there is no one inside. It means that they don't want something very precious to get hurt. 9. A sharpened sense of justice. Those who develop the most sensitivity to injustice in life are usually those who encounter it the most. Someone whose voice is not heard when they are wronged, who was suppressed at a young age, who was forced to remain silent. When they grow up, they burn inside at the slightest disrespect. And this is not just a reaction to the moment. It is the echo of a rebellion that was suppressed in the past. These people value consistency, not rules. The reaction they show when a promise is broken, when someone is silenced or not appreciated, even if it seems exaggerated, is actually an outward expression of what has accumulated inside them over the years. This is precisely what Carl Jung called emotional complexes, the collision of the trace of the past with the reality of the present. This desire for justice that grows inside them can sometimes become excessive, hardened, but their intention is not to punish. It is to no longer be silent, no longer be ignored. What they really need is to know and feel that the once indefensible little child can now be protected. 10. Sensing the unseen. When some people look at the faces of others, they see not only an expression, but also a hidden emotion, a suppressed word or a swallowed tear. This may seem like an intuitive ability, but it is often the result of pain from the past. Because a soul that has carried its own pain alone for a long time is more sensitive to what someone else carries. It can understand a sadness that echoes in silence, a fear that avoids eye contact. This deep intuition gives the power to understand emotional details that others fail to recognize. But it is also exhausting, because someone who also recognizes the invisible layers of everything cannot just stay on the surface. This state, which Carl Jung described as contact with the collective unconscious, causes the person to develop a heightened awareness not only of themselves, but also of those around them. Most of the time, these people don't speak to say, "I understand that you are not well." But they hold space with a look, with a way of being. Because the one who knows the real pain often recognizes the pain of others without words. 11. Fear of being a burden. There are people who choose to remain silent even when they need someone's support, who smile and say, "I'm fine," instead of asking for help. Behind this behavior often lies a silent fear, to be too much, to be uncomfortable, to seem like a burden. Especially if you come from a background where your feelings are minimized or ignored, over time you learn to lighten your existence. These people are usually kind, considerate, never putting others in a difficult situation, because deep down they have accepted that their own needs are secondary. This is exactly what Carl Jung called unconscious guilt. The person feels indebted just for existing. Asking for help feels like weakness. It becomes difficult to believe that they deserve love. But being human is about getting tired from time to time, feeling needy, and being able to express it. And living in fear of taking up space causes a deep fatigue in one's inner world. Because a heart that wants to be loved by hiding its existence actually wants to be noticed the most. 12. Appreciating the little things. People going through difficult times start to value small behaviors more than big words. Someone sincere, "Did you come?" Message, a coffee in the morning, the silence at sunset. These may be ordinary for others, but for someone going through deep wounds, these details carry a kind of restorative power. Because someone who has spent his life with losses, disappointments, and loneliness looks for traces of peace, even in the simplest moments. In the process of what Carl Jung called individuation, one no longer looks for show, but for truth in one's inner journey. For someone who has reached this point, what is small is no longer insignificant. On the contrary, the meaning of everything starts to simplify. Compassion is felt in a glance, not in a sentence. Trust is built not in big promises, but in repetitive simplicity. This sensitivity means seeing what is overlooked, realizing what is not felt. Because someone whose inner world has been shattered learns to stand up again with the small balances of life. And then we realize the greatest healings are hidden in the simplest things. Everything we experience shapes us. Some scars are indelible, but how we learn to live with them determines who we are. Every trait we describe here is not a flaw, but a defense against pain that was once developed. And maybe today it is time to realize if those defenses are still protecting you, because sometimes there is no danger anymore, but you still think it is not safe to let your guard down. If you have found yourself in these stories, know that you are not alone. Everyone has the right to be understood, to exist without being a burden, to be loved in silence. And healing does not start in a day, but with a realization. If you have watched this video so far, you have already taken that step. Write "My pain taught me too" in the comments. Maybe someone else will see that sentence and feel a little less alone. Because sometimes a single sentence changes a lot.